Well, good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to be with you. My name is Brian. I'm the senior pastor here. And if you have a Bible with you this morning, I invite you to open up to Genesis 39. If you're looking at one of the in-house Bibles in the seat back in front of you, it's page 41 in that Bible, and we're going to be working our way through Genesis 39 this morning. So as you walked in and you were given maybe some things, a bulletin, you maybe also were handed a card that has our logo from our past series. What we wanted to do is just pass along all the big ideas from last series by way of recap. So if you didn't get one of those and you're interested in having one of those, you can grab one at the Connection Center after the service. And again, it's just kind of a recap of what we've just done. And I'm really excited to jump into this series today, our series, God with Us. It's our Advent series that will carry us through the Christmas season. So a question to get us going this morning: have you ever been in an uncomfortable situation or an anxious situation or maybe a tense situation of some kind, and what you have really wanted in that moment is somebody there with you? Right? They don't have to do anything. You don't expect them to try and fix your situation, but what you really want is just somebody's presence with you. Maybe you're walking into a new situation that you've never been before, or you're walking into a meeting where you're expecting to get some sort of feedback or some criticism, or maybe you're in the middle of conflict resolution, and what you really want is someone who can just be by your side. Anybody resonate with that this morning? Yeah, so when I was in grad school, I moved to Chicago for seminary, and I was new to the area because I moved from New England. I was getting the lay of the land, and one day I was out running errands, and all of a sudden, I'm just a couple miles from campus, a cop pulls me over. I see these blue lights flash behind me. Cop pulls me over, and I'm clueless as to why. I'm just out running errands on a given afternoon, and the cop comes to the window, and he's like, "Hey, do you know why I pulled you over?" And I was like, "No, I have no idea." And he said, "Well, you were speeding." And I was confused. I'm like, "Really? I was speeding?" He's like, "Yeah, you were doing 55 and a 35. I was like, "Whoa, how did that happen?" Dumb question, maybe. And what had happened was I was in a section that was, the speed limit was 55, but then without me knowing it, the speed limit dropped to 35, and I was just trucking along at 55 miles an hour. Now, the cop said, here in Chicago, anytime we clock somebody going 20 miles over the speed limit, they have to get a ticket and they have to appear in traffic court. I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. Come on." He's like, "No, sorry, it's what I got to do." And so he gives me the ticket. I go on my way. Right, the court date is set for a few months later, and during that time, I'm determined to get out of this ticket. Like, I have decided to become my own lawyer and craft my own defense. So that way, when I stand before the judge, I can wheel and deal and get out of this ticket. Because the fine was like $200, $250, and I'm a grad student. I don't have that kind of money to spend on a ticket. And so I'd craft this defense. And truth be told, my defense was horrible. I mean, it was like, "Hey, I'm a good guy. I'm new to the area. I didn't know, please," right? And so the day of the case or the court date comes, I go, and it's a room about, this size with a bunch of pews kind of like this, and you just go and you sit and you wait your turn, and then the judge calls you up front, and then he does this thing, and then you leave. And so finally my turn comes up, and I'm like in the little seat area. I've been rehearsing my defense the whole time. And he calls me up front, and he asks me a question. I don't even remember what it was. It was probably like, "Hey, did you do this? Are you guilty? You need to give a plea." And I start fumbling over my words. I didn't really understand his question because he's using judicial jargon. And then he asks again, and I keep stumbling over my words, and he just tells me to sit down. He's just like, "Just go sit down. I'll get to you later." And so I go sit down, and I'm like totally embarrassed, right? Because here I am trying to be my own lawyer, trying to get out of this ticket. And there's other people in the room, and I'm thinking, I've just made a fool of myself in front of everybody. So I'm sitting in my seat, I'm hanging my head, and I'm just so mortified. And out of nowhere, the cop who pulled me over is right by my side. And he comes up next to me, and he gives me a few words of encouragement. And he says, "Hey, do this, say this, and you'll be fine." And in that moment, it was oh, it was so good to have him there. Wasn't expecting to have him there at all. And so he goes back to the back of the room. The judge calls me forward again. And as I'm standing before the judge, the cop who pulled me over, he's coming and he's standing right by my side during this moment. It was such an encouragement. He said a few things, and he didn't get my ticket wiped away, but when he got it off my record and he reduced the fine, just having his presence there, I walked out of the courtroom and I was so encouraged. Why? Because somebody was with me. I didn't even need him or want him or expect him to get rid of the ticket or reduce the fine, but just to have him with me was encouragement enough. Sometimes when we find ourselves in tense and uncomfortable, painful situations, the thing that we want most is somebody else with us, the presence of somebody else. This week we're starting a new sermon series for Advent titled God with Us. And the idea for this series comes from the name of a child that's born in Isaiah chapter 7. In Isaiah 7, the people of God find their safety being threatened. There's a foreign army that is threatening to attack them, and the prophet Isaiah comes to the people and he says, I want you to know that everything's going to be okay. And here's the sign that I'm going to give you. There will be somebody who gives birth to a baby, and his name will be Emmanuel, which literally translates to God with us. And he says this baby will be a sign that God's presence, protection, and provision is with and for you. Now, it's thought in the Old Testament that this baby was actually a signpost and a foreshadow of Jesus, who would be also born in the New Testament, born of a virgin, and he is said to be the fulfillment of this prophecy in Isaiah 7, that he will be the ultimate Emmanuel. He will be the ultimate God with us. And so what we're going to do through this series is we're going to look at 4 stories of 4 individuals who are all said to be with God, or God with them, as they step into difficult, scary, or uncertain situations. And today we're going to look at a story of a guy named Joseph from the book of Genesis, at a time when he was in unbelievable circumstances, but yet he found that God was with him and was able to persevere through them. And here's my big idea for this morning. It's this, my sermon in one sentence, is that God is with us in our successes and our struggles in order to further his redemptive story, both in our lives and in the world's life. God is with us in our successes and struggles to further his redemptive story. And so we're going to work through this chapter. I'm going to offer 3 observations about 3 moments when God is with us, and then we'll have a moment at the end to respond. So follow along as we start reading Genesis 39, verse 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had done, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care with Joseph in charge, and he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. And so my first observation from this story is that God is with us in our success. God is with us in our successes. Now, the story begins with a guy named Joseph in Egypt, working for a guy named Potiphar. And depending on your knowledge of the Bible, it might be helpful to have a little context of who this guy is and why he's in Egypt. And what we know is that Joseph is actually the great-grandson of Abraham. And we refer to Abraham a lot because Abraham is thought to be the founder of our faith in some ways, the father of our faith. God's redemptive work in the world actually started with Abraham. After the world spiraled downward, once sin entered the world, God came to Abraham and he said, I'm going to put this whole thing back together. And Abraham, I'm starting with you. I'm going to make you into a family that will develop into a nation. And out of this family and this nation, the world will be blessed because of you. So Abraham is kind of like the father of our faith. Now, Abraham had a son named Isaac. And then Isaac had a son named Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, who became kind of the father of the Israelites because he had 12 sons. Those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. And Joseph was one of his 12 sons. Joseph was number 11 of 12. And the thing that's most notable about Joseph's story early on is that out of these 12 sons, Joseph was daddy's favorite. Joseph was the favored son, so much so that all 11 other brothers hated him and wanted him dead. And the scriptures are really specific about this. If you turn one page back in your Bible to chapter 37 of Genesis, we read this about Joseph in verse 3 and 4. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. There it is. Real explicit, really clear. He was daddy's favorite because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to them. So Joseph is loved the most by his father, and the way that his father demonstrates his love for him, he makes him this beautiful ornate robe with many colors. I have a little picture of a rendition of this from one of the plays, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. You've probably heard of that play before. It's all about Joseph's story. And so his father made this beautiful, colorful robe to him to signify that he was the favorite. Now, on one level, this is really odd because what sort of dysfunctional family really highlights one kid over all the others? But two, it's weird because in that culture, it was usually the firstborn who had the primary place in the family, not the son near the end of the line. And so, of course, all the other brothers hated him, especially the firstborn son, because here he is walking around with this robe signifying, hey, I'm daddy's favorite. Now, on one given occasion, Joseph's brothers were out in the field tending their father's flock. And one day, Israel says to Joseph, I want you to go check in on your brothers and just see how they're doing. So he goes out to the field. The 11 other brothers see him coming, and they think to themselves, this is our chance. This is our chance to get rid of Joseph once and for all. And they devise this plan to kill him. But then one brother says, no, let's not kill him. We don't want his blood on our hands. Let's find another way to get rid of him. And so what they do, they end up selling him to a caravan of Ishmaelites who are traveling to Egypt. And then they take this beautiful robe that he's wearing, they kill one of their father's goats, they dip his robe in the goat's blood, and they take it back to their father saying, a wild animal must have killed Joseph. We found this robe covered in blood, but we didn't find him. And his father grieves. All the while, Joseph is sold to these Ishmaelites who are going to Egypt. He then gets sold to Potiphar once he gets to Egypt, and then he becomes a worker in Potiphar's household. But then he rises to success because he's incredible at what he does. And we read right from the beginning of this story that the Lord is with Joseph in verse 2. This will become the phrase that's the refrain throughout this chapter. 4 times, 2 at the beginning, 2 at the end, we read that the Lord was with Joseph. Now, what's interesting about Joseph's story, in this chapter at least, is that it starts on somewhat of a positive note, right? I don't mean to gloss over the tragedy that he experienced to get him to Egypt, and we'll circle back around to his tragedy in a second. But when the chapter opens up, knowing nothing of what has come before, it's kind of starting in a positive place because Joseph is succeeding. Joseph is prospering. He's getting promoted in his job. He's doing really well. And it says that the Lord was with him and made him prosper, which means that when we find success, God is with us in our success. And this is a really important thing to remember and realize, because so oftentimes when we experience success, it's really easy to think, like, yeah, I made that happen. Yeah, of course, I'm gifted, I'm talented, I'm smart, I'm savvy at business. Yeah, of course things are succeeding because I am a fantastic person, right? Now, you may not say those things, but it's really easy to think those things. But what we neglect when we have that mindset, is that there are all sorts of circumstances that are outside of your control that have brought you the success that you have. Like, for example, as a pastor, it's really easy for people to think, well, the reason that the church succeeds is because it's the pastor who's doing it, when truth be told, I probably do 10% or less of the work around here to make a church grow. Because there's other staff, there's elders, there's deacons, there's volunteers, there's all sorts of other people who are giving of their time and energy to make anything grow. And it's always easy for the person on top to get all the accolades, when in reality, it's a whole bunch of other people who are doing the work as well. And when you find yourself thinking like, yeah, I made this thing happen, you're neglecting to realize that God has put all of these other people and things and situations around you to make the thing succeed. I have this clip that I want to show you from a movie about Steve Jobs, and it's a scene where Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, the two founders of Apple, are in an argument because Steve Jobs won't give credit to other people who made Apple succeed, and it illustrates how even in times when we are successful, if we lose sight of who God is, that He's with us, that He has activity in our lives, we can easily grow arrogant and proud about the success that we're experiencing. Go ahead and take a look.
Talking about the Apple II, which is not just a crucial part of this company's history, it is a crucial part of the history of personal computing.
For a time.
The least you can do if you're going to downsize these people,
They're going to live in the biggest houses of anyone on the unemployment
is to
line.
acknowledge them. Acknowledge them and the Apple II during this launch.
This is a new animal.
This whole place was built by the Apple II. You were built by the Apple II.
As a matter of fact, I was destroyed by the Apple II and its open system so that hackers and hobbyists could build ham radios or something. And then it nearly destroyed Apple when you spent all your money on it and developed a grand total of no new products.
The Newton.
The little box of garbage. You guys came up with the Newton. You want people to know that. This is a product launch, not a luncheon. And the last thing I want to do is connect the iMac
to the only successful product that this company has ever made. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that happens to be the truth. The Lisa was a failure. The Macintosh was a failure. I don't like talking like this, but I am tired of being Ringo when I know I was John.
Everybody loves Ringo.
And I'm tired of being patronized by you.
You think John became John by winning a raffle, Woz? You think he tricked somebody or hit George Harrison over the head? He was John because he was John.
He was John because he wrote Ticket to Ride. And I wrote the Apple II.
Everybody, look, I want to clear
Nobody
the auditorium.
moves! You made a beautiful board, which, by the way, you're willing to give out for free, so don't tell me how you built Apple. If it weren't for me, you'd be the easiest day at Homestead High School.
These people live and die by your praise. So here's your chance. Acknowledge that something good happened that you weren't in the room for.
No.
Steve, do it. It's right. It's right.
Sorry, but no.
You have two guys who are fighting. They both want the credit. One happens to want to share it with other people, but in his heart of hearts, he really, really wants it. When we succeed, it's easy to think, yeah, I made this happen. And the ironic thing is that when we fail, it's really easy to blame other people, isn't it? Like, I was successful, but this failure, hey, that was everybody else's fault. But what we fail to realize is that God is with us in our success. God is with us in moments when life is working and things are clicking and we're just absolutely killing it. And it's actually God in His sovereignty who has orchestrated life in such a way for those things to happen. God is responsible for our success. So observation number one, God is with us in our success. Observation number two is that God is also with us in our struggle with sin. This is what we read starting in verse 7. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he's entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. God is with us not only in our successes, but also in our struggle with sin. Now, we're not told that Joseph is actually struggling with giving into the temptation here, but we see that the struggle is real and ever present before him. And what's fascinating about this story is that Joseph is so successful that his master Potiphar does not concern himself with anything in his house. Nothing at all. We're told in verse 6 that the only thing that Potiphar cares about is the food that he eats, which means that Potiphar completely trusts Joseph. But it also means, and also seems to suggest, that Potiphar is rarely around. He's out doing all of these other things, continually working outside the home, that he's never in the home, and it creates an ideal context for Joseph to be tempted. Now we read that Joseph is well built and he's handsome. He's a strapping, good-looking guy, and he catches the eye of Potiphar's wife, right? If her husband is working all the time, perhaps she's lonely, desiring companionship, feeling isolated, and here's this young, attractive, good-looking guy who's around her all the time, and so she decides to pursue him. And the interesting thing about Joseph's story is we're not really told a whole lot about his relationship with God. Right? We're told that God is with him, and he seems to have some awareness that God is with him in the midst of this. In part, we can conclude that because he seems to be a man of integrity. Right? He seems to be a man who does what's right even though his circumstances are not ideal. Right? Even though he's succeeding, he probably doesn't want to be in Egypt. He probably would rather be at home with his family and the dad who loves him so much. But even in his circumstances that are less than ideal, he's not playing the victim. He's not saying, "Hey, this happened to me." He's not growing entitled, thinking, "I deserve something better." He's not thinking, "Hey, justice has not done right by me, so why should I care about anybody else in this world? I'm just going to go get what's good for me and let that be enough." But we don't find that attitude at all surfacing in Joseph. Rather, we see him fighting to do what's right. We see him to be seemingly a man of humility and a man of integrity, and it seems as though he knows that God is with him, because he says in verse 9, he said, "Why would I do such a thing, a wicked thing, and sin against God?" Now, oftentimes, when people tell you that God is with you in the midst of your struggle with sin, when God is with you in the midst of temptation, I think sometimes people view God as though he's this celestial Santa Claus, meaning he's up in heaven and he's got two lists. He's got the naughty list and he's got the nice list. And he's watching closely to see if we are going to be good little boys and girls to determine which list we should be on. And so in our struggle with sin, it can seem as though God is outside of the circumstance, that God is away from us. He's looking down, he's scrutinizing our life to see, let's see how this plays out, right? As though we're little pawns in his twisted temptation game. But I would suggest that maybe a better metaphor to describe God in the midst of temptation is that of a coach, right? That God is in it with you. That God is desiring for you to succeed. That God is desiring for you to do what's right. He's not looking just to see, oh, what's going to happen? Let's see how this plays out, and let's see if we can kind of torment this person a little bit more. It's as though God is like, I'm going to coach you through this. I'm going to be in it with you. He's invested in the circumstances and wants you to succeed. We read in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 10, Paul says that when you're in a place when life is going well he says, watch out and stand firm, because that's the moment you're most likely to fall. He says this, he says, so if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. Because when life is going well, when we're succeeding, when we're on top, it can easily be that we think, oh, nothing could knock me down. Right? I am at the top of my game. And Paul is saying, watch out, because that is the moment that you're most likely to fall. When you think you're untouchable, when you think you can't fall at all. He goes on to say in verse 12, verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. Meaning that no matter who you are, like temptation comes after all of us, the person on the top, the person on the bottom, and everybody in between. And those who have gone before you, who have been tempted and have fallen, are essentially no better or no worse than you, because temptation is common to all people. And he says, and God is faithful, though, in the midst of it. And he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but even when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can endure it. So when we find ourselves in the midst of temptation, when we find ourselves in the midst of struggling with sin, we know that God is in it with us, and that God is for us, and that God is providing a way out so we don't have to give into it, but we can fight back against it and persevere in our faith. And so God is with us in our successes. God is with us in our struggle with sin. But then thirdly, God is also with us in our suffering. This is what we read starting in verse 13. Now when she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside him until his master came home. Then she told him the story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Right? There's this cycle in Joseph's life that the Lord was with him, and he made him successful in everything that he did. Now, Joseph's story, when you look at the whole thing, is this really wild ride of ups and downs and highs and low. Right? At the beginning of the story, back in chapter 37, we said that Joseph is his dad's favorite. Right? He's the favored son who has this beautiful coat, and the rest of his brothers hate him. And because of that, right, they sell him to these Ishmaelites who are journeying to Egypt. And so essentially he is sold as a slave to Egypt, talking about going from a high to a low. The most favored position in the family to a lowly servant, wondering, what in the world is going to happen to me? Where am I going? Are these people going to kill me? Are they going to sell me off to somebody else? And when I get to that new place, what is going to happen to me? But then once he gets to Egypt, he has incredible success in Potiphar's household, the most successful person there. He's in charge of the whole estate. He's incredibly prosperous. But then, through this interaction with Potiphar's wife, he's falsely accused for something he didn't even remotely desire to do, and he's put in prison. He's accused and put in prison, but then, once in prison, he has success again, and he rises to the top. Now, again, I don't mean to suggest that, oh, look, he's successful in prison, life is going well. I mean, he's still in prison, right? But at least his character is shining through in prison, and people are able to see, like, okay, there's something different about this guy. What is it? It's the presence of God with him. Whether or not Joseph was actually ever able to articulate that, we don't know. We're not told. But it seemed that everybody else noticed that there was something different about Joseph, and it was the presence of God with him. And so the point of the story is that God was with Joseph every step of the way. Through every peak and every valley, God is walking with Joseph. This story is framed, we said, at the beginning and at the end. 2 times in both places, the Lord was with Joseph. And so the point of the story is not about, hey, here's how you manage life's up and downs. Let me just give you 5 tips to manage the ups and downs of life. The point of the story is that God is present with us in these moments. And so that means we have to ask ourselves a question. The question being, what's life like for you right now? Like, would you characterize your life as successful? Are you on a mountaintop moment? Does it feel like you're just killing it in life? You're knocking it out of the park. Things seem to be going your way, and you're tempted to say, look what I did. Look what I can do. Look at the good things that are happening because of who I am. Or are you in the bottom of a pit, and you're thinking to yourself, like, how in the world did I get here? Like, where is God in the midst of this? This seems so unfair. This seems so unjust. This isn't the life that I wanted. And what am I supposed to do from here? How am I supposed to move forward from here? How am I supposed to climb myself out of this pit that I'm in? Or maybe you find yourself somewhere in between. Maybe you find yourself moving in a certain direction. Maybe you found yourself on top and now you're starting to slide down, or you found yourself at the bottom and, hey, maybe things are starting to work their way up. No matter where you are, the point of this story is that God is with you in it. That if you're succeeding, God is the one who should be honored and be expressed thanks to for the sake of bringing you that success. And if you're in the pit, the point of this story is to say, hey, God is there with you. God is not afraid to climb down into the pit with you and sit there for a while. But again, this story isn't just about God being with you in your ups and downs, your highs and lows. This story is about this, our big idea that God is with us in our success and our struggles to further his redemptive story. Because this is where the trajectory of Joseph's story goes. After he is put in prison, and he's there for a series of time, he rises to success. He is given an opportunity to help somebody get out of prison. He has this ability to interpret dreams. He interprets this guy's dream. He says, hey, you're going to get out of prison. And when he helps this guy get out of prison, he tells this guy as he's leaving, hey, remember me. Don't forget me. And when you get out on the other side, some way, find a way to return the favor. And then what happens? Nothing. 2 years go by. This guy forgets about Joseph. He's in prison for another 2 years. Does not remember Joseph. He has forgotten again. Finds himself in prison for another full 2 years for something that he didn't do. But then, through a miraculous turn of events, again, Joseph has this ability to interpret dreams, and Pharaoh, the top guy in Egypt, has this dream, and nobody understands what it means. Pharaoh asks all the people in Egypt who are magicians and sorcerers, can you interpret this dream? And nobody does. But then the guy who was set free from prison says, hey, there was a guy in prison who interpreted one of my dreams. And Pharaoh says, bring that guy to me. And it's Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream correctly and saves Egypt from utter destruction. And so Joseph is set free, and he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man. Not only was he successful in Potiphar's house, not only was he successful in prison, he now becomes successful leading the entire nation of Egypt. He's number 2 in command. And the dream that Pharaoh had that nobody could interpret was that famine is coming. Famine is going to just kind of wipe out this land. It's going to be bad. And the dream comes early enough that they can stockpile stockpile grain over the course of a few years so that during the famine they can survive. Famine then kind of wipes out all of Egypt, all of Canaan, which is where Joseph is from, and people from all over the place are coming to Egypt to buy grain because they were able to get on the front end of the famine and store it up and save it up. And guess who should come? Guess who should come to buy grain from Joseph? That's right, his 11 brothers who sold him to slavery and sent him off to Egypt. Now, when they come, they don't know who Joseph is. They don't recognize him because he's number 2 in command. They thought he was probably going to go, just waste away as a slave somewhere, but he has risen to the top. And through a series of interactions, there comes this point when Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. He says, "This is who I am." And their reaction is, he's going to kill us. He's going to wipe us out. He's going to do away with us because of what we did to him. But at the very end of Genesis, this is the verse that summarizes and captures all of Joseph's story. Genesis 50, verse 20. Joseph says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph has this incredible perspective about him. That, I've been through hardship. I've been through hell. I've been through suffering. Life has not treated me fair all the time, but God has sustained me the entire way. And what God is doing through this, the highs and the lows, the good and the bad, God is working out something much bigger than myself. He is working out something much bigger than my story. He is working out his redemptive purposes to save many lives and continue his redemption forward. And when we have that attitude about us, when we have that mindset about us, we can have success and be like, this isn't the end game for me. When I'm not fully responsible for my own success, and this isn't what life is all about. There's something bigger, there's something grander on the horizon to which all of this points. And then when we find ourselves in a pit, when we find ourselves in painful places, we can remind ourselves that this world is headed somewhere. The trajectory of this life is moving in a certain direction, and it means the redemption and restoration of all things. And what this story ultimately does, believe it or not, it points us to Jesus. Jesus who's willing to climb into the pit with us. Jesus who had a high place in heaven, who had the highest place of all mankind, all humankind, even God himself. He sat at the right hand of God and he descended from that place to come to earth. He went from the highest high to the lowest low, entering into the brokenness of our world, ultimately being treated as a criminal for something he didn't do and was executed on a cross. Why? To save many lives, to bring about the redemption for many people. And that's what Advent is all about. It's about this anticipation. It's about this expectation that Jesus is coming. He's come once, right? So in Advent, we look back. We look back to Jesus' first coming. He came as a baby. He grew up to a man. He died on a cross. He rose from the dead. He ascended back to heaven, and he's coming again. And we wait in hope. No matter if we're having a great season of life or a horrible season of life, we wait in hope that when the Lord returns, good things are coming, that his life will save many people, and he will bring about the redemption of all things. And so as we enter into Advent this year, as we enter into the months of December, when things are crazy, when things are busy, and we're running around buying presents, planning parties, going to all sorts of things, may this message be the thing that rings true and resounds deep in our souls, that Jesus has come once. Jesus is coming again. So no matter if life is great or life is not, you can cling to hope. You can have certainty that everything is going to be okay because Jesus is King. And in whatever circumstance you're experiencing, he's with you, he's for you, and he will work it out for the redemption of your soul. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for you. We thank you for your love and the way that you have come to us, that you have left your high place in heaven, that you've entered into our world, that you have descended so that you could ascend and bring us with you. And so we pray in the season of life we're in, no matter if it's a great high or a low low, that we would have hope, that you are a good God, bringing together all things for those who love you. And you are working them in such a way to further your redemptive story, both in our lives and in the world around us. I pray this in your name. Amen.